happy to talk to you this morning. One of the things that I know is really important to Arrow as part of their D&I series is really bringing education to both our residents and anyone else who might be watching. And so in January, we'll be observing Poverty Awareness Month. And I heard that this is something that's really important to you as you're also looking to eradicate poverty. So why don't you introduce yourself? Let me know what community you're from, and then let's just hop right into this conversation.
Thank you for having me. My name is Bella Hoeller. I'm the Resident Services Director at Vitalia Mentor. I'm also a licensed social worker as well, so I have a little background with different populations, which makes me so excited to talk about this subject today.
Yeah, that's amazing. You're an expert in it. I know you are. A social worker, just really community-based, always loving people and looking to really build communities that are functional and that are healthy. So why don't we start out with talking about what poverty really is? Because I think when people discuss poverty, they have an image in their mind, okay, of what poverty is. And maybe that image is right, but maybe that image also includes lots of other different factors. So why don't you start out by telling us what poverty really is?
Yeah, so the broad definition for poverty, it's a state or condition in which one lacks the financial resources and essentials for a certain standard of living. So that's just kind of the broad definition. There are 6 separate types of poverty, which we can kind of focus in on as well. To start off, there's situational poverty, which is all based on an adverse life experience that someone has experienced. It's very common. You probably know somebody who has experienced this, or you yourself has. It can look like the loss of a job, a divorce, a health crisis. And my mind immediately goes to the pandemic. Think about how many people's lives were affected with their loss of income and how, the economy really took a hit from the pandemic.
Yeah,
That's a great example of situational poverty.
that is a really good example of situational poverty. I think the other thing people don't understand about poverty is that poverty is sometimes unfairly hitched to laziness, right? Or people just not wanting to work. But with situational poverty specifically, someone can be working, right? Someone can be actively engaged in working in the American workforce, right? And still be experiencing situational poverty. Like you said, it could be because of a loss of a job. Maybe they have a loss of a spouse. If you think about the family sort of poverty line in the US, I think is about $23,000. Okay. So that can happen really quickly if you are part of a 2-income household and maybe you lose a spouse. So situational poverty, that's a really good example. Thank you. Can you give us another type of poverty?
Yeah, next, generational poverty, which includes being a part of a family that has been living in poverty for 2 or more generations. And this really affects someone's whole thought process and their point of view of the world. A lot of individuals who are affected by generational poverty, they are kind of stuck in a fight or flight mode. So they are simply focusing on surviving since they are bred in such a high stress environment. And it's such a cycle that is so difficult to break. If it's happening generation to generation to generation, it's so difficult to break that cycle.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons that is because if you were born into a family who was experiencing poverty and then you never yourself got the resources to sort of end that cycle, of course it continues. And again, sometimes poverty is hitched to people being unwilling or unable to work for a various number of reasons. But generational poverty specifically, it is a type of poverty that you are born into. It's a cycle of poverty. All right. Third type of poverty.
The third type of poverty is absolute poverty. Someone affected by absolute poverty just has a lack of resources and experiences food insecurity. And what is food insecurity? It is when the availability of nutritional and adequate and safe foods, or the ability to acquire those acceptable foods in a socially acceptable way is limited or uncertain. And the United States actually has one of the highest rates of food insecurity, which
Yeah.
is something that we probably don't even think about because for us, people, it's just easy to go get food, but there's so many people out there that just don't have the resources or the ability to have that nutritious food.
Yes, and when you talk about absolute poverty, I think this is the image that most people get in their minds when they think about poverty. You think about people experiencing homelessness, people who lack the basic necessities just for a healthy life. So, what about another type?
So next is relative poverty. That is when an individual is living 50% or below the average income. It's kind of like that middle line where you're not rich, but you're also not living paycheck to paycheck, but compared to others around you, you're struggling. So that's what relative poverty is.
And I think with relative poverty, also, you're unable to function in the society that you're in,
Right.
right? So maybe you can't participate fully. So when you said maybe you aren't, living paycheck to paycheck, but maybe you aren't able to do some of the other things that people in your neighborhood, in your community can do. So relative poverty is not one that I think people would even categorize as poverty because of that image we have in our mind.
Right.
Okay. And there's still another type of poverty, right?
Yes. The last two, they're urban and rural. For urban poverty, it may be presented as issues with housing, having accessible, safe housing, safety issues, overcrowding, and sanitation. Food deserts are quite common with urban poverty, and a food desert is in an urban area where there are limited access to buying affordable and nutritious foods. When I was in school, we actually did like a little survey of where we lived, and we looked and saw how close a grocery store was, have it be to the bus stop, in walking distance of places. And food deserts are so much more common than you think about because in a lot of urban areas, you look around and you see a dollar store or a gas station, and you can't buy nutritious, healthy foods from those areas.
Yes, and
Um,
this is true for rural areas as well, right?
yes, yes.
So
So
it's really difficult for people to get access to not just food, but clean water also.
yes,
When
yeah,
you are not in an area where maybe you can get clean water and you can get fresh fruits and vegetables. And it might be much easier for you to walk to the gas station, right? And grab a bag of potato chips, which are high in sodium, right? But if you have to eat, you have to eat, right? And
right.
sometimes the other issue is that healthy foods are not only are they inaccessible, but they're not affordable for some folks, especially people who are living in absolute poverty. So that covers the six types of poverty. Can you just list them one more time for us?
Yeah, so we have situational, generational, absolute, relative, urban, and rural.
Yeah. So, what do you think are some ways that individuals can help end poverty? Um, I think that it's probably very difficult for people who are not experiencing poverty in any of these six ways to think how they might be able to help in some real way that impacts individuals. But there are some things we can do. Can you share those with us?
Yeah, working directly with committees or elected officials to discuss community needs or propose possible changes to specific policies that affect the poor. Um, Also, donate to your local food bank, like nutritional, good, hearty foods.
Yeah.
Even volunteering your time to work at the food bank for a day, volunteering, donating, calling elected officials, doing all those things.
I think that all of those are really great ways to help bring equity into the conversation. Also, when you think about housing, when you think about maybe redlining, when you think about populations that do not have access to education, this is where we start to see some of the generational poverty happen. And so I think it's really good that you pointed out speaking to your elected officials, thinking about policy changes, thinking specifically about ways that we can be more equitable and sharing our own resources. I think about how many times a year I look at things around my home that I don't use. Donate those items, donate them to shelters, donate them to schools. Think about donating your time to maybe food banks, or I know that really soon some of your communities will be partnering to donate with Meals on Wheels on food routes. Food insecurity and poverty affect older adults too, and disproportionately women. So, is there anything else that you might want to add to the conversation today, Bella, as we close out our talk about Poverty Awareness Month?
I think to end it on, just put yourself in a point of view where you're looking at other individuals as other people. I know it can kind of be hard to get stuck in such an egocentric point of view, concerned about ourselves at all times, but we never really know what someone's going through. And just kind of be kinder to everybody, donate our time and our resources if we have it, I think is something that we could all do for sure.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we all inhabit this planet together and we should take care of one another.
Yes.
Bella, thank you so much for your time today. I look forward to hearing what your community will be doing during Poverty Awareness Month.
Thank you.